Good afternoon. Thank you for joining the Northern Virginia Technology Council and Virginia Tech for our Data Science Speaker Series event. Please welcome Tom Wotecki, Chairman of the Data Science Speaker Series and Director of Data Analytics and Applied Statistics Master's Program, and the Director of the Academy of Data Science at
Good afternoon. Thank you, Taryn. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's Data Science Speaker Series event, featuring the Chief Data Scientist and Director of the Innovation Lab at the U.S. Government Accountability Office, Taka Ariga. His presentation will be followed by a panel of data science experts. It was great to see many of you in the social lounge networking before the program started. I hope to see you there again after the program. This series is a partnership between NVTC and Virginia Tech. It will showcase the impact of data science and explore the reality and future of data science. NVTC is the trade association representing the Capital Region's tech community. We unite, educate, and advocate for our members to advance a thriving tech ecosystem where we live and work. Virginia Tech is a comprehensive land-grant institution that enhances the quality of life in Virginia and throughout the world. Virginia Tech pushes the boundaries of knowledge by taking a hands-on, transdisciplinary approach to preparing scholars to be leaders and problem solvers. This series is made possible by our sponsors, Virginia Tech, our partner, and George Mason University, our silver sponsor. Thank you for your support, and a special thank you to the NVTC business partners and academic partners. Their support enables NVTC to provide content and programming all year long, and they are Booz Allen Hamilton, CIT, the Center for Innovative Technology, the Consumer Technology Association, Deltec, Dominion Energy, George Mason University, Innova, KPMG, Maximus, Microsoft, Nobless, Northrop Grumman, Old Dominion University, PenFed Credit Union, Pillsbury, PNC, SAIC, Venable, Verizon, Virginia Tech, the Policy Advisor, Hunton Andrews Kurth, the Marketing Agency Advisor, O2KL, and the PR and Marketing Advisor, the Merit Group. Thank you all for your support. Now it's my privilege and honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Taka Ariga, who I've gotten to know over the last year and a half. Taka is the first chief data scientist appointed by the Comptroller General of the United States for the Government Accountability Office. He also leads GAO's newly established Innovation Lab in driving problem-centric experiments across audit and operational teams through novel use of advanced analytics and emerging technologies. In addition, he is a member of the Senior Executive Service responsible for working with GAO stakeholders to adopt prospective views on oversight impacts of emerging capabilities such as AI, cloud services, blockchain, RPA, 5G, and Internet of Things. Taka is natively fluent in both Japanese and Mandarin Chinese, and in his spare time, he's a serious classical chamber musician and a competitive tennis player. Please welcome Taka Ariga.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for that introduction. It's good to see you again. I just want to mention on the onset that the partnership between GAO and Virginia Tech has really blossomed in the past year and a half or so. We've been fortunate to be able to get some of your really talented students to support the accountability challenges that the Innovation Lab is driving. So thank you very much for your leadership. Yeah. So today let me just see if I can share my screen. There we go. So it's good to be with the NVTC community this afternoon. Today I'm here to talk about GAO sort of venture into the realm of innovation. And it's always a tricky proposition in the public sector when we talk about how do we innovate, because it does come with a level of risk. And that risk is even more magnified when you're talking about an agency of essentially professional critics. For those who may not be familiar with GAO, we're certainly well known for our audit reports. But something that's unique about GAO is that maybe one of the handful of agencies that have a statutory authority over wide swath of federal government, whether those are operations, programs, or policies. So from a technology, but even specifically from a data science perspective, we don't get to choose the kind of data that we analyze. We essentially have to have the capacity and the capabilities to address all corners of the federal government. And then part of the conversation is how do we use evidence-based policymaking sort of approach to develop our findings and recommendations that are sort of leading to the kind of benefits that we can sort of generate on behalf of Congress, but more specifically on behalf of the American public. So in 2019, for every dollar invested in GAO, we were able to return $318 in the form of measurable financial benefits. And so that equated to roughly $219 billion overall. In 2020, we're similarly applying the sort of tremendous exponential return on investment relative to our ability to conduct robust and really credible oversight across a range of topics. So that includes the pandemic and other related sort of work that are currently a part of our portfolio. We're bullish about our ability to stay prospective relative to many of the emerging capabilities that we'll talk about, and how that may translate to even greater depth and breadth of analysis that we're able to do, whether that is leveraging blockchain or AI or cloud services. And so for us, the key question is here is how do we think differently in a sort of organization that may, perhaps sometimes are considered risk adverse, but do so in a way with a sense of urgency and but also driving, differences across the ecosystem that we serve. So the innovation lab itself. So I mentioned earlier on that it is a sort of a newest entity within GAO. And our sort of objective is really how do we, through innovation, turn GAO from an audit-centric agency into a knowledge transfer organization. And how do we do so using data science and emerging technology? But equally important is how we sit in the intersection of the Congress and the oversight community as well. How do we support our congressional stakeholders in terms of enhanced foresight, insights, and oversight? And how do we work with the IG community, our state and local partners, and our international colleagues in terms of leadership and knowledge sharing in the areas of data science and emerging technology? Our sort of vision statement, we affectionately, sort of describe ourselves as an entity that empowers new capability and enhanced capacity across the oversight community within the fourth industrial revolution. And we really do so through prototyping and really exploring the art of possible. So what that means is, what you see in terms of the figures here. This is a sort of illustrative example of all of the various topics that we're tackling. One of the, I think, unique duality that GAO lives in is that just as with many organizations, we aspire to adopt machine learning, natural language processing, blockchain, et cetera, as part of solutions to help us deliver our oversight and accountability missions better, to help our operations run more efficiently. But we also need to figure out how might we audit these same capabilities that are being implemented by the executive agency. So, AI is definitely top of mind these days, and cloud services and many others topic. So the idea is not necessarily just to explore the capability and capacity on any of these topics, but also having to figure out how might we audit them down the road. So, this is sort of a representative example of the kind of projects that we have relative to these emerging capabilities. I'm happy to talk through a couple of them. But one thing that we also want to be very mindful is the work that we do doesn't just stop at prototypes or minimally viable products. We want to make sure that we have a very close coordination with our Office of Chief Information Officer in terms of how do we scale those solutions, how do we, as much as we can, containerize and orchestrate some of our data science solutions. So when we start talking about a scaled deployment, uh, a lot of the underlying complexity has been abstracted away. And how do we incrementally leverage automations in a way that not only automate existing processes, but use that as an opportunity for us to rationalize ways that GAO deliver its mission on behalf of Congress. So when it comes to innovation agenda, as I mentioned before, working amongst an agency full of professional critics, it doesn't just automatically happen. We really need to think through ways and how we de-risk how people think about novel capabilities. And so a lot of time is making sure that we are specifically addressing the kind of levers that a lot of our engagement teams worry about. And those levers are time, quality, and budget. And so how do we make sure that we invite them to ideate on new idea, new thinking, new capabilities without jeopardizing those three critical elements as GAO continues to produce quality audit reports? One of the maybe a lesser known fact during the pandemic is that in addition to all of our existing portfolio of work, GAO has actually taken on over 100 pandemic and COVID-19 related audit engagements, technology assessments, and other related oversight products. So it's a testament to my very talented colleagues that have been able to literally punch above our weight in terms of executing even while everyone is in sort of a telework environment. So all that is to say that's even more critical when we talk about innovation in the middle of a pandemic is how do we do so making sure that the ongoing work continue to execute, but how can we think about impacting audits of tomorrow? And that brings me to the second point is in terms of engaging with our mission teams and operations team with agility. GAO has, a set of legacy processes, a set of legacy infrastructure that has been built upon sort of a traditional waterfall methods. So how do we essentially doubling down on a scale agile framework on everything that we do from infrastructure modernization work that Innovation Lab is shepherding to many of the data science projects? How do we decompose them into a series of biweekly sprints in a way that can help us iterate those solutions with our stakeholders and help us pivot quickly? And so this is one way when we say fail fast, is really using the agile methodology as the backbone for us to try different approach. And if certain approaches don't work, and we have the latitude and the flexibility to pivot. And so this is something that has worked quite well for us within the Innovation Lab. The third piece here is really addressing the capacity issue. We know we would never be able to hire our way out of data scientists and statisticians to address just growing number of engagement that really have significant data science components to them. So we want to make sure that as much as we can, really start treating data as a form of infrastructure, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, so that it's akin to, let's say, electricity or faucet. When you turn them on, electricity flows, water flows, and how do we make sure that we have the infrastructure and the capabilities so that foundational activities such as data ingest, such as basic data exploration, basic data visualization, can be turned into self-service, so that our data scientists and our statistician could really apply their skill sets and their time to higher value challenges. So these are collectively the three strategic execution thinking that Innovation Lab has put in place. And so far, with about a year and a half under our belt, we have tackled more than 24 or so different projects and are really working on a variety of not only low-hanging fruit, but really systemic issues around improper payment, around sort of foresight generation. And even within the pandemic, we were able to quickly stand up a GAO-specific COVID dashboard to really look at the geographies in which GAO operates out of, and how do we do our own Monte Carlo simulation to try to take into consideration metrics such as hospitalization rate, infection rate, death rate, et cetera, to really help our executive committee think about the kind of operational decisions that needs to be made based on what the data is telling us. So this is just a quick example of how GAO is really within the agency to transform a lot of our legacy processes. But how do we bring data science and emerging technology to reimagine how we sort of conduct oversight and address accountability challenges? So just want to be more specific to how we approach relative to a data science strategy. So this is a data science series, and we do recognize that for GAO to successfully carry out our oversight work, we are entirely dependent on the completeness, the quality, and accuracy of the data that we collect from agencies and our ability to analyze them. So our data strategy has three specific components, and we sort of affectionately call them the Trident strategy. So the first component is around data governance. The second component is around data science, and the third component it's around data literacy. So on the item of data governance, this is where we want to make sure that there's a data catalog so that all the various data assets that are coming to the agency has visibility broadly across the agency, whether those are open source information, whether those are subscription data that GAO has purchased, whether those are mission specific data that may have certain access rights or sensitivity, or whether those are operational data that may be useful across a variety of teams at a GAO. We want to make sure that we have an ability to apply those data access policy in a uniform way. So the model under data governance is really a single source of truth, but also only a single copy of that truth to make sure that there's an integrity and there's sort of enhanced efficiencies around how we ingest, analyze, and essentially leverage the data assets as a sort of an underpinning of all of our audit work. The second piece here of the strategy is a data science piece. And this is really not necessarily limiting ourselves to, let's say, COTS product per se, not necessarily limiting ourselves to certain standardized analytical methods, is really to open up the aperture to say, how might we do things differently, applying different methodology, even within the realm of machine learning, sort of allows a space for us to iterate to see whether we might bring, for example, something like an ensemble approach to a problem set, but with a very specific audit-centric mindset to data science. So for our auditors, we're all about transparency, we're all about repeatability, we're all about explainability. So erring on the side of more linear approach to the problem sets than perhaps some of the black box techniques that may be available out there. But the idea here is to strengthen the tech stack that our data scientists and data statisticians have access to, and really take that cloud-first approach to make sure that flexibility and that tooling can evolve as the kind of accountability challenges themselves evolve. The third pillar here is around data literacy. And again, taking a very oversight and auditor specific focus to this particular topic. But at the end of the day, we do recognize, for us to be successful as an oversight agency in the 21st century, we need a data literate workforce. So we're in a long-term effort to really revamp all of our training curriculum relative to statistical techniques, data science techniques, technology-related topics, and adapt them in a way to specifically suit auditors, again, with repeatability, explainability, and transparency in mind, But how do we then augment all of our training with reinforcement around it? So, for example, just in time, video vignettes that folks might be able to access when they need certain topical reinforcement, providing them with some sort of training environment so that whatever they learn through formalized courses, they have an ability to practice them on demand basis. And eventually, we want to make sure that this leads to a set of curriculum that we could share across the oversight committee as well to specifically strengthen data literacy across the accountability community. The way that we are executing on this data strategy has three guiding principles. And I mentioned sort of cloud first posture. And so this is where Innovation Lab has actually stood up GAO's first operational and authorized a cloud environment for us to do our mission work. And that is certainly no small task. We intend to build on that foundation, not only to support sort of ongoing strengthening of our analytical capabilities, but use that as a sort of learning platform to really shepherd through the agency's broader modernization efforts, going from on-prem environment to cloud. The second part here is making sure that there are specific delineation while coordinating closely with our CIO, making sure that we are not equating analytics as IT, but also not equating IT as analytics. There are analytics specific nuances relative to the level of flexibility. Open source packages is a good example of that, where a lot of time IT shop treats R packages and Python packages almost like a software change, software management that requires architectural review board and whatnot. And those really runs counter towards the speed a lot of time that data science requires. And the third piece here I touched a little bit on is really treating data as another form of infrastructure. With all of the modernization efforts happening across executive agencies, the generation, how the digital information is being generated is just accelerating year over year. And for us to be able to sort of handle that capacity, that broadening pipelines of incoming data, we really need to sort of start treating data in a way as though we treat electricity and we treat water and air. So having the technical capacity to be able to securely transfer information, having the capacity to be quickly iterate on data exploration, data visualization, et cetera, to help us set the kind of audit scope that our congressional stakeholders expects us to set. So these are the three guiding principles that will help us help shepherd GAO through our sort of a Triton data strategy. And I just want to wrap by give an example of when I say GAO lives in an interesting duality. Not only do we aspire to use a lot of these emerging capabilities, we also need to figure out how the oversight challenges be addressed. And AI is a good example of that. Within the Innovation Lab, we have about a dozen or so various forms of machine learning engagements. By the way, sidebar, one of the surprise when I first came into GAO is just the amount of unstructured data that are inherent part of day-to-day audit engagements. Think regulations.gov, public comments submitted through that portal. Think contract award data that are available through FPDS. Think single audit repository that are available through Department of Commerce. So, and even within GAO itself, how do we mine years and years of audit reports so that when we start an audit engagement, we're not replowing the same field relative to findings or recommendations and focus area, et cetera. So all of these are examples of complex natural language processing kind of questions. So, one ways that Innovation Lab has really added value to GAO is we develop our own custom topic model that has outperform some of the commercially available solutions out there. And while at the same time able to address the kind of transparency and explainability requirements that GAO does have. So that's an example of really sort of take those problem-centric approach on the challenges facing the agency and how do we develop sort of solution against those problem sets. On the flip side of that same coin, we know it's not if, it's when GAO will be receiving congressional requests to audit AI postures across the executive agencies. As a matter of fact, we already have 2 ongoing work that exactly is to that. How do we evaluate AI postures across a specific agency? The time for us to figure out how to audit them, how to assess them, how to evaluate them, it's not when we receive the request. The time for us to figure them out is essentially now. So in about a month time, we will be publishing our first AI oversight framework, really aiming at taking a lot of sort of principles out there that are frankly at a very high level. How do we then push them down to specific practices that managements can consider? And based on those practices, how can an auditor assess against performance, objective, even issues around bias and ethics and transparency, so that we can actually generate credible and robust oversight reports of AI and do so in a timely way. We fully recognize that we cannot take 12 months to 18 months to evaluate AI solutions. By the time that report comes out, the rest of the world would have gone on to something else. So this is I think a marquee report that will be coming out at the end of June. But we know this is not an end-all be-all. It's really a first step, a down payment, if you will, for GAO to sort of express itself that we recognize AI is here to stay. And we know we will be asked to evaluate all sorts of different AI applications, whether it's defense, whether it's healthcare, whether it's autonomous vehicle, you name it. So we do need to have a consistent framework to start the conversations around the accountability equation of AI. But we fully intend to partner with industry players, academic, nonprofit institutions to take that journey further ahead. But again, we're very much looking forward to the publication of the AI oversight framework in end of June, early July timeframe. So I hope that gave everyone sort of a overview of how GAO specifically is tackling the notion of innovation. We recognize this as a need, an existential need at that. 2021, GAO celebrating our centennial, and for us to thrive in our next 100 years, we do need to sort of have a prospective capacity to really think about what could IoT do for us? What could blockchain do for us? And then, more importantly, broadly share that knowledge, whether it's success stories, whether it's lessons learned, across members of the oversight community so that we can collectively do a better job of driving accountability across a sort of really complicated landscape of emerging technologies. So with that, Tom, I think I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thanks, Taka, for a great presentation. I really enjoyed your discussion of the Trident strategy and its guiding principles. And I think the challenge of oversight of AI in the executive agencies is a particularly important one. So I wish you luck on that. That's a really important initiative, sounds like. Well, I'm now pleased to introduce our esteemed panelists, starting with Nirrup Menon. Nirrup is Associate Dean for Arlington Ventures at the School of Business at George Mason University. He's published over 25 peer-reviewed journal articles in domains such as health technology, information security, privacy, enterprise systems, and online platforms. In his research, he uses statistics, econometrics, and data mining techniques for descriptive and predictive analysis. Welcome, Nirrup. Vishal Vishal Ranjan serves as Vice President within the Regulatory Agency Programs Business Unit of CGI Federal. In this role, he oversees the development and execution of the business and solution strategy across a diverse federal civilian agency portfolio. Under Vishal's leadership, CGI federal teams help government to harness the power of their enterprise data through improved data integration, secure data sharing, and advanced reporting and analytics, thereby enabling federal agencies to operate more effectively and better serve their constituents. Welcome, Vishal. Our moderator is Stuart Kippelman. Stu is the Chief Information Officer of Parsons Corporation. He's responsible for its global IT function, including all aspects of information technology strategy, operations, and digital business transformation. Stuart holds multiple patents in data mining, analytics, and business intelligence. Stu, the panel is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone can hear me. So Taka, thank you so much for that presentation. That was really excellent. And I'm just going to jump into some questions here and start our discussion. Please feel free, for the four of you to, feel free to jump in and ask each other questions as well. So let me kick things off. So a few kind of ordered questions here. So Taka. So great overview. You explained a lot about what the GAO is, right? And its function and why it's so important. Can you give us some examples of, let's say, projects that come out of your group, or what's some of the actual work that's going on in AI? You gave a couple of examples, but give everyone a really good example of, how does all of this really translate into the work that you guys do?
Yeah, no, happy to. So let me start by maybe covering the oversight portfolio, then go into the insight portfolio and our foresight portfolio. On the oversight front, we are looking at topic, wide-ranging topic. How is AI being applied to drug discovery? How is AI being applied to, let's say, healthcare delivery? We have done technology assessment in those areas, and in terms of other types of products, we have done what we call spotlights. These are really quick hitting 2-page primer intended to educate our congressional stakeholders. And those topics have included forensic algorithm, genomic prototyping. Those are kind of a sort of very data intensive kind of applications that GAO has sort of taken a look at it. We even have gone into areas in terms of just, how do we for example, one of the key areas that NSCIA report identify is the lack of talent and pipeline of data science talent. And so we have looked at how STEM education, even specific topics around sexual harassment in STEM field and how that's being covered. So it is wide ranging, not only for my team, but also how do we take our capability to support portfolio of other GAO mission team as they look at AI-related work. I mentioned there are a number of requests coming out of Congress. So one area of collaboration is between my team and our national defense team, and looking at the work that Jake has put out, but also collaborating across DoD-IG. So it does run the gamut. That's on the oversight portfolio. In terms of the insight, I think a good example of that is the AI oversight framework. How do we sort of evaluate them in a way that brings clarity to the process, so that we're not swimming in this sort of 50,000 foot level of principle driven guidance, but not necessarily be able to bring them down to the practitioner level. In terms of other sort of insight related work has to do with the Innovation Lab project itself. How do we develop AI solution to specifically help our mission team to address a very specific challenge that they're facing? We do think in a way that, I think one of the questions here is how do we abstract some of the works that GAO has done? A lot of issues that we do come up usually are very esoteric to specific to that particular engagement or that particular mission team. But we are mindful of, whenever there's an opportunity for us to make a generalized models available across the agency, but hopefully eventually across the oversight community as well. That topic model that I talked about is a good example of that. We are using to mine not only GAO's historical corpus of reports to be able to identify key findings from years ago, stakeholders, all the metadata attributes, but that same concept applies to, let's say, an IG organization or even a state or local organization that you can apply that topic modeling capabilities. So that is an idea of it, a good example of insight. On the foresight, we are actually, as a matter of fact, applying very similar topic modeling capability to look forward to see whether there are topics of interest that GAO really need to start paying attention to now, as we sort of develop our environmental scanning processes, but also more importantly, our strategic plan for the next 5 years. Is there another COVID-19 type of event that we can sense now? Or are there kind of areas that GAO has not covered before that perhaps we should turn our attention to? So those are the kind of foresight areas that we also support.
That's great. I appreciate that that explanation. So you know what? Let me follow that up with from Vishal. Can you give us some idea about? At Parsons, right? We work really closely with the GAO and not just them, but many agencies throughout the government. And one of the hardest things is keeping up with everything, right? So as you Taka, for example, create some new uh, uh, foundational document, right? That everyone has to follow. It's a lot of work and it's a lot of effort to align to that and to deliver what everyone's expecting, right? So Vishal, I was hoping that you can share some of your experiences with the GAO or with. I know you provide a lot of guidance in these areas, so I'd love your insight into all of it.
Sure, Stu. I think it's been interesting, especially over the last 12 plus months now and being in the pandemic, watching how agencies are having to react to data sharing, data integrity, and looking at data from the perspective of future focused decision making. And something that I think Taka mentioned and sort of being at the forefront of this, I think at GAO is interesting because the GAO is obviously always looked at as sort of that accountability and oversight kind of organization and body that is sort of the gold standard of how they do things and what they do across the federal government and supporting other entities in that way. And our clients, I think, have really shifted their focus now to mine data and look at data in a way that they haven't really had to do over the last certainly decade, and especially I think that's accelerated now in this pandemic environment. For example, we have clients that CGI does a lot of system integration and development work across different types of platforms like enterprise content management systems. We have clients now that have been focused so heavily for the last several years on implementing those systems, modernizing them, keeping up with the latest sort of platform upgrades and things like that. But what they haven't taken a lot of time to do is look at, now that they've gotten decades of data in there, to not just improve the solution from the standpoint of the solution itself, but how that solution can be mined for data, how that data can be then used to make informed decisions and better decisions from an operations perspective to support the agency's mission. I think that's been interesting to see and kind of see the evolution of what that's going to be over probably even the next several years. We're supporting clients doing that, and it's pretty exciting to watch. The other thing I'll add is a lot of what we are seeing in federal now is things that have been done in commercial for a very long time in the private sectors, especially in Silicon Valley, I think. And those ideas, those principles are starting to move into the federal government, where the federal government is now advancing and taking on new ways of looking at data, analyzing it, and bringing in new tools and experts also as well, expertise, to help shape and inform how that process is going to take place. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see, and we're certainly intrigued to see kind of how we can support our customers and GAO and others as well in the federal space in that sort of journey.
That's great. Thank you. And picking up on what Vishal said, Taka. So, taking everything you explained as well, and when you talk about the Innovation Lab and you talk about AI, and I especially like the idea of mining historical data for details and information that help you looking forward, right? Because you could use AI to only look back, uh, but not necessarily predict the future, right? So I'd love to hear some of your thinking around actually doing that. What do you pull out of historical data, and how do you use it for helping you going forward?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. It's a two-part answer I'll provide. So the genesis of why we started developing our own topic modeling was exactly that. When GAO starts an audit, right now, historically has been a very manual process. You have to know someone who has previously done that work, go speak to that individual, find out what were their finding, what were their methodology, and then sort of piece it together on what the scope should be for this time go around. So we were specifically trying to tackle that problem, is that can we algorithmically organize GAO historical report so that conversation is not a manual exercise. You can sort of do that research more or less on demand, especially during the COVID. It's not like we can just run into our colleagues in the hallway to say, have you worked on that issues before? It started as that research focused question on why we developed the topic models. But it quickly transformed into us realizing there are other applications for something like this. So, for example, we started looking at all of the congressional website. Each committee put out their own sort of format relative to hearing, press releases, papers, and documents and whatnot. There's no uniform standards. But might we be able to sort of scrape all that information, apply same topic modeling on that corpus of data, and try to connect that with what GAO has already done? In other words, can we bring GAO's work more closely to the conversations that are being had, right now in front of committees, in front of a congressional staff, in front of various elements of Congress? And so that has now morphed into, we internally call it Project SIA, as both a research tool, but an ability for us to keep a pulse on what's happening on the Congress in a very, very contemporaneous way. And so that when there's specific topic, when GAO is being mentioned, when, whatever the case might be, we can quickly follow up with either open findings, recommendations, or a suggestion in terms of areas of exploration in the future. So it does help us to be much more focused in terms of our, sort of forward-looking posture on the areas that GAO should tackle in collaboration with Congress. So that is an example of where it started with a smaller problem set that sort of grew organically into something that both has the insight element but also the foresight element to it.
That's great, and that's really good. I'm gonna come back to you guys in a second. Narup, hi. I don't want to forget about you. Definitely not. Hey, look. So, I mean, one of my many jobs as Parsons is I'm responsible for university relationships, right? And we spend a ridiculous amount of time, in a good way, right, trying to um, uh, help and give back to the universities and to the students, and whether that's internships. We're actually working on something called a micro internship now, where someone can just work with us for a week and get some really cool experiences. I mean, it's a lot of work to, and this is a setup. This is a setup for you, right? It's a lot of work to get an alignment between what the students learn and the realities of what we need people to be doing, even an entry level graduate, right? So when you hear about all this, and you hear about the great work Taka is doing and Vishal, how do you absorb it all from how do the students um, see all of this? What could we do better to help um, get the students ready? I know it's a pretty broad question there, but
No, no, but it's a very good question. And so what we have been trying to do is, of course, we listen to all our industry contacts, and we develop courses that are aligned to the type of skills that the market is looking for. But in terms of data mining, what we have been trying to do is move some of our advanced courses to have real life projects. So rather than download, like toy examples from the UCI or Irvine, UC Irvine data set or something, we actually have companies give us data. One of the challenges we find, of course, they'll give us like their customer data, their products data, their sales data, and then students have to figure out, okay, what is the business question? What do I merge at the right levels to come up with a solution? One of the challenges, though, we face in continually engaging companies is the whole non-disclosure agreement, the fear to share data of any kind, and also the upfront work that the company must do in trying to de-identify data and make it as usable for students. But I think one thing that would be great is to have more uh, experiential courses like yours, not just experiential internships, but also like courses, just the 6 months, 4 months. I know it's a very short time to do a data science project, but they can use very rudimentary techniques. Just with a simple decision tree, they could give a small recommendation to a company. So yeah, that's where we should be heading.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Geo actually has a very specific problem to address relative to the idea of experiential learning. Like we as a government entity, we just loathe shipping our data outside of our agency boundary. So I mentioned earlier on, we actually piloted our special student volunteer program with Tom Wateke's department to bring capstone students inside GAO. And rather than say, here's the data sets, go knock yourself out, we actually give them access to our cloud environment. We let them really figuring out how do you spin up elastic, compute? How do you decide on the kind of infrastructural needs based on the problem set? How do you think about from a presentation perspective? Do you use like R Shiny or Tableau, et cetera? And runs the gamut of saying, for your work to pass the auditor's muster relative to quality control, how can you think relative to transparency and not just what is the most esoteric black box technique that you can bring to bear? That actually has been tremendously successful for us. And I believe for the students as well. Not only does it give them a real life experiential learning, it also happens to meet the capstone's requirement. And for GAO, it really is providing that platform and almost like a career pipeline for those that aspire to get into the public service. So it's been a triple win for us.
That's great, and that's really fascinating about how you're doing that. We have a question that I'm going to set up. I'd like to ask actually Taka and Vishal both the same question. So like at Parsons, over the last 18 months, we aggressively moved to the cloud. We migrated over 80%, probably we're in the 85% of all on-prem workloads into both AWS and Azure, strategically different pieces. And it allowed us to completely transform our on-premise data centers to resize them, to both upscale and resize them. And we're just probably like everybody else. We're in a cloud-first strategy, right? So the question is, and actually for Taka, it's really directly, but with Vishal, I think it's more about how you view the industry and your customers, right? But hey, look, what is the IT strategy and the cloud strategy? You touched upon it. Maybe you can go into a little more on that.
Yeah, no, happy to. And Vishal, I might ping you about how to migrate momentum into the cloud
Yeah.
as well, but it's a separate conversation.
And by the way, let me just add real quick that we all know that everything in IT is about the data, right? So we push that up, down, left, and right within Parsons, that this is all about data, insights, enabling the company to make a faster and better business decision, right? So, but behind all that, right, there is an architecture and a strategy to deliver that. Love to get your thoughts and feedback on it.
Yeah, without oversimplifying, I'll give two-word answer. It's about culture and it's about governance. I actually think the technology piece is relatively straightforward. It doesn't matter who the cloud vendors are. There are usually templates around deployment. There are usually templates around security. There are usually templates, reusable code that can be applied. Now, the issue is whether that modernization is in fact rationalizing all of the existing processes, all the existing bottlenecks to reimagine how that could work in the cloud, or are we wholesale lift and shifting the problem from on-prem to the cloud? And that's usually a lot of conversations happen because that's more about the people. Are they qualified? Are they credentialized? If you don't have to swap out hard drives anymore, do you still have a job, right? For example, and so those are the kind of conversation that we're actually having closely with our CIO shop in terms of is the migration ready, not specifically from a technology stack perspective, but from an operational piece. So you migrate a bunch of application into a cloud. They still need to be deployed. They still need to be patched. We still often forget the notion of ATO. Once you move it from on-prem to cloud, the ATO doesn't come with it. You have to reauthorize it. And that often doesn't get built into the timeline per se. So next thing you know, you move a bunch of stuff, and people are asking can I not access those applications for 9 months, 12 months, however long it takes. And then I think partnership is ultra important. Um, modernization shouldn't just be about the IT, for example, Office Product Suite or VDC platform, for example. Vishal mentioned, data these days is the king. How do you facilitate the infrastructure to not only support the keeping the lights on type of application, but how do you support the very specialized needs of data scientists and analytics professional? And the last piece I'll just add is if we're going to go to cloud, like we need to understand what that means. Like cloud first approach sounds nice, but are we ready to take cloud native services, or are we simply trying to spin up a bunch of virtual server using cloud as a proxy of on-prem? Those have very different implications because one way allows us to evolve as technology evolve, and we all know there's dozens of different new cloud services coming online. But if we're simply spinning up virtual servers, it's very difficult for us to be nimble, be agile in a way that a more cloud native services can be. So those governance, those cultural conversation, I think, are much, much more important than the nitty gritty of the technology pieces because a lot of time those answers exist. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Is whether those answers fits inside the agency's operations in a way that is compatible, in a way that's sustainable, in a way that frankly, are we willing to listen to those very difficult questions?
That's great.
I would literally say exactly what he said as my answer, but I'll add on to that and say that one of the biggest challenges we see with our clients moving to the cloud is, in fact, not really necessarily the technology itself. That's certainly a component of it. But the biggest challenge I think we face, especially in the federal marketplace, is legacy business process and business processes that have been done a certain way for a very long time, because the answer is usually that's the way we've always done it. And moving to cloud is an opportunity for most customers to look at their system, but also their process and say, how can we make improvements to it, not just from a technology stack architecture perspective, but actually from a business process and an opportunity to make processes more efficient, add automation to it. Cloud provides a lot of tools and technology that you may not have had before that allow you to reassess your process, find ways to make it more efficient, create more automation, and intelligently then migrate components or migrate apps to the cloud in a way that is low risk, but also provides high value and return on the investment that you make. That is something we've really been excited and working with our clients for a very long time now. I would also say that, touching on the part of the data, the piece of it too, one of the things that you look at when you migrate to the cloud is especially if it is just a lift and shift, if that's really what is necessary, okay. But then in terms of how that data is then utilized, how it's architected in the cloud, the integration points, I think that's another very, very important thing, because another thing cloud opens the door for is more data transparency, integration, but also security is another important aspect of it. So you want to make sure that you're migrating your data properly, the integration points are there, but you're looking at it from a security perspective too, because as we know, there are always going to be nefarious, threats out there and folks with ill intent looking for certainly certain sensitive data and information, and the federal government is always a target of that. And making sure you do that in a way that's secure, that's smart, and efficient, and it improves hopefully performance of how you can utilize that data. That is all very important.
Great. Narup, any comments, thoughts on the topic?
Not really. I mean, I think a lot of these environments, if they were cloud, it would be easier also to bring students to do projects in there, because without having the students actually to travel to that particular organization and reside within their offices, and make it in a way so that the students are not able to download that data down to their computer, but actually work on it on the cloud.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is definitely a ease of universal access. Of course, assuming security is done the right way, right? For cloud access, and obviously we spend a lot of time at Parsons, and I've no doubt that Taka and Vishal do as well, in making sure that we are following all guidelines and regulatory requirements, making sure that the systems do what they're supposed to do only to the right people, right? So I agree with that completely. Um, you know, um, Another question for both of you guys is that we talk about AI, and we throw around that term a lot, and uh, I find from experience and talking with many others in the industry that most people haven't really even figured out dashboards before we get to AI, right? And AI really is going back to it's about providing insights. I always kind of think about it as hidden meaning. What is the hidden meaning of the data? Because we have the access, most of us have data, so it's not necessarily a data collection issue. It's an interrogation and finding the hidden meaning in the data, right? To me, that's the benefit of AI. Dashboards provide insight into exposure to the data. It can expose things we have, but the AI is really what provides us with that hidden meaning. So, in your experience in your organizations, or with, Vishal, with customers, what's your perspective on this whole, I'll call it, dashboards people think is AI and real AI, right?
That's a good question. My sort of opinion and viewpoint on this may be different than maybe even some of my colleagues at CGI. But what I'll say is this: dashboards, especially in federal, with financial system data, enterprise content data, legacy systems, they've been around for a while, and it's not a novel concept per se. And I think part of what people need to look at is what and how are our dashboards being designed? How is the data being presented? How is the data being kind of aggregated there and then given to the user so that it actually adds value to what they're looking for? We've helped many of our customers redesign dashboards and existing kind of reporting and analytics tools, because it wasn't necessarily the tool that was bad or the dashboard that was bad. It was a matter of how the data was being aggregated, mined, and presented to the users that didn't add value for them. Now, that all being said, I think AI and the concept of that, especially in the federal marketplace, again, is sort of new. But what I'll challenge is this: that if you don't have good data, if you have bad data, trying to do any sort of artificial intelligence and sort of mining of that data and figuring out how to better utilize it may not end up being beneficial, and may end up being something that is costly in the long run, that doesn't add a lot of value. So I think looking at your data and making sure that it's providing you with the information you need first, making sure that it's clean and that it's not redundant, and that you've got data that's actually helping you make intelligent decisions today, then taking that to actually add AI to it and improve it is sort of the model we would recommend and that I would probably tell a customer to go at in that light.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why we have data governance as one of GAO's strategy, garbage in, garbage out. And this is something I learned from Dave Spurk, who's the CDO for DoD. Data governance is independent of whether we're talking about AI or business intelligence reports or any other analytical product. At the end of the day, all of these data needs to be able to answer, is my data accurate? Is my data complete? Is my data reliable? But Stu, to answer your question, I view sort of dashboard and business intelligence report as a way to really communicate known risks. Whether cost has been exceeded, whether threshold has been met, et cetera. What AI to me, especially actually more specifically around the machine learning aspects of AI, is it allows to really highlight the unknown risks. Anomaly detection, for example, a certain boundary that perhaps is not easily discernible in a sort of noisy data set using human, judgments. But machine learnings are really good at discerning which side of that line does that particular data sets fall under. But one of the reasons that we embark on the AI oversight framework is that while the predominance of AI capabilities today are mostly machine learning driven, we know DARPA and many other R&D organizations are pushing the boundary relative to what they call a wave 3 of AI. AIs that can really reason and capable of metacognition, almost like a human can, right? So, for example, right now, if you show an AI model a dashboard, AI wouldn't know what is that supposed to mean. But tomorrow's, meta capable, like cognition capable, and reasoning capable AI might be able to look at a dashboard and say, "Oh, I get it. In this particular context, this is what it means, and this is what action you need to take." So if we don't even get the oversight of the current crops of machine learning algorithms right, I don't know how we can do that when those machine learning algorithms start be able to rationalize thinking on their own.
That's great.
Stu, if I may add.
Please, please. You're up.
Yeah, so I was going to say that dashboards typically, when I think of them, are mostly descriptive, and they can be used in long-range planning, or mid-range planning. When I think of AI or ML, it's more predictive, and in addition to unknown risks, it's also those unknown wins. How do I cross-sell a product to a customer? Should I bid on this project or not? Things like that. I think it's a predictive at a transaction level, if I may.
Yeah, I agree with that totally. And at Parsons, like I have a team that does some fantastic work in AI, and what excites me is applying AI to basic problems, right? It's really easy to think about, AI for some really complex, crazy thing, right? But it's harder to think about. I find it's harder to think about it for the more day-to-day issues because it doesn't sound as exciting. So, for example, we use AI to actually predict um, uh, financial where we're going to be financially in the next month, and we're getting pretty accurate with it. Across a number of different categories, so it allows us to start looking at, wow, not next month we should look at this area, and we should focus on that, and we use it to look for customer satisfaction and for pieces, to kind of puzzle pieces that we weren't aware of, and that's kind of the hidden meaning piece. So, for Parsons, it's really changing the way that we think about the future, right? And the future meaning anything past today. And the problem with large companies is all of these meetings and dashboards and management reviews and sales discussions. It's based on what happened yesterday. You can't change it. So I've been trying to use AI to focus on the future, not necessarily. I'm not spending a lot of time on looking at historical information because I want to be able. Now, of course, you need to use the history to predict the future, right? Yeah, because You can't make up the future. Yeah. So I completely understand what you're saying, and both of you, I appreciate that. Um,
Yeah.
so
Can I
yeah,
just add
anything
one?
else, please?
Yeah, I think that's another reason why I think data literacy is important. There are so much uncertainty and probabilistic characteristic baked into AI. We don't want to go into a scenario that says, well, AI model told me somebody committed a fraud, or AI told me the projection is X. There needs to be, I think, a data literate workforce for us to make sure that our people can actually interpret and understand what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, and certainly apply that sanity check. Stu, you mentioned financial projection. If AI was 100% accurate, I think we will all be owning Caribbean islands right now to be able to sort of short stocks and whatnot. So there needs to be a corresponding level of workforce education so that they can design but also consume the outcome of AI products.
Right. And it's deeper than trends because we know that history does not predict the future, right? So you need a lot of other data inputs in order to take those historical trends and decide, is that going to continue? Is it going to change? Right? It's deeper than just well, in the last 8 quarters this happened. Is
Yeah.
you can't then take that and correlate that that's exactly what's going to happen in the future, right?
Yeah, and,
Um,
and there are even, I think, interesting evolution on that front, right? So even the perspective of a corporate governance has changed to say, is it purely profit driven, or should there be a societal consideration? Same thing with data scientists. We're now expecting some of our data scientists to be ethicists, humanists, sociologists, to be able to think about biasy. You can sort of reasonably argue, is that a reasonable expectations? But that is decidedly where the conversation is heading, to say it's not good enough just to produce accurate, predictive, confident AI models. Are you being mindful of the societal consequences?
right.
Who are you leaving behind? Whether it's law enforcement, whether it's national defense, whether it's financial services, whether it's healthcare, and other sort of prime examples. Just because you can develop a highly accurate model, but is that really the society that we aspire to create?
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Now, with that said, let's bring up a little more complicated topic. We've talked about the technology, right? So it sounds like all of us are, at least some part of our careers, have been technologists, and kind of somehow ended up here. Um, there's Vishal very accurately mentioned that this really is all about business process, right? That you can't do technology by itself because you'll get nowhere without the business process being, lean and accurate, and if the business process is not in place uh, and used by the right people in the right way, you're not going to have the accurate data, right? There's your data integrity issue, so you're not going to have that there, right? There is a third piece to this though, which is culture, right? So let me ask the three of you. We'll start with Taka. Tell me about the culture that at the GAO, or just in your career, right? How does culture affect all of this?
Everything, I think, will be the short answer. But let me give a more nuanced answer. At GAO, what we find is that there are certainly leadership support relative to GAO needing more perspective view on AI, IoT, 5G, et cetera. And then we also have an incoming cohort of what we call digital native, right? So they grew up in the Facebook era, Twitter era, and they're very comfortable with the notion of personalized ad. They're very comfortable with some of the privacy concerns that maybe us in our generation may not be used to. So those digital native fully understand the benefits and implication and risk associated with something like AI. What we're specifically trying to impact are the sort of the middle managers, those that may not have necessarily grown up in an algorithmic world. So their mindset sometimes are still anchored in the sort of a traditional way of, perhaps, for example, sample-based selection for audits, for example, interview-based or document literature research-based kind of audit work. So how do we um, get them to one of my assistant directors is really fond of using this terminology. How do we get them to a state of discomfort, but pull them back so that we're not actually risking their ongoing engagement? Because I think they are actually open to new way of thinking, as long as we don't impact their budget, their people, their money, their timeline, their qualities. So those are, I think, the kind of practical levers that many of our middle managers are concerned with. So if we can decouple our experimental work from their day-to-day obligations, that for me has been a really good strategy to push people into an area of discomfort and thereby, really making those cultural changes. Because without exception, once they see the benefit of, well, as an AI-enabled solution, 9 out of 10 times the aha moment, the light bulb moment goes off, and then off to the races that we go. But for us to get to that point, there's a lot of priming the pumps, softening the beach kind of approach that we need to take so that we are addressing their concern and not just walking around the hallway to say Taka has this AI who wants to buy. This sort of a hammer looking for nail approach. It will never work at GAO, but I would surmise to say it probably won't work very well for many other organizations.
I've always found that I've always defined change as taking something that's broken yet comfortable and making it better but uncomfortable, right? So, and it takes a long time for it to move from from uncomfort back to comfort, even if it's better,
Yep.
right? It's just that's part of the world. And do you find, one follow-up question for you, do you find digital natives care a whole lot less about what's behind the curtain?
I wouldn't say they care less because at the end of the day, they did join GAO, right? And one of the reasons that GAO cares about all of this behind the curtain item, but I think they see it more readily, the benefits and potential pitfalls. And what I see is that they're also much willing to just give it a try. I don't know whether it's going to work, but let me apply random force. Maybe I apply something else. It may or may not work. Let me compare all of the output metric to see whether this is meaningfully changing anything. But more importantly, once they find the right solution, they have an expectation that this becomes implemented. So this is another area of cultural friction to say, just because it works doesn't mean GAO is ready to sort of wide scale adoption. I think they definitely see has a much more perspective view of in terms of what AI can do and comfort with emerging technologies. But I don't think they're necessarily Pollyannish about the implication, whether it's privacy, whether it's the disparate impact issues that we talked about.
That's great. Thank you. Narup, how do you teach culture?
Yeah. That's a tough one.
Sorry, I had to ask it that way. Taka set me up perfectly for.
Yeah, I guess some of it is by showing enough amount of examples in class. One of our research, for example, showed that when small, well, not small, but let's say insurance companies, because they have fraud is very, very small percentage. They don't have enough examples. But if these companies can share the data, examples of fraud with each other, they have more examples of fraud and they can do better predictions, and it benefits. It's a social welfare benefit to get that kind of a culture of into data sharing. It's things like showing them examples, showing them numerically that look, this is what the data tells us, that you do better. Everybody does better if you share data. So hopefully, when people think about things like that, or they see those examples, you can make some change in their cultural attitudes.
That's good. It's just so hard to, I've given a lot of, I've done a lot of work with universities, as I said, and, it's just the experience there is everything, right? To see how it moves from an idea into the reality, but it has to move back and forth amongst the three pillars: the technology, the process, and the culture, right?
And just to kind of piggyback off of both what Narup and Taka said, I'll add this. I think as students get more internship experience and get to go to companies like CGI or others in the industry, and especially those that get to work with a customer on the federal space, I think having those students come back and bring back what their impressions are of the culture they experience, not just with their program or the organization they're with, but the customers they got to interact with. I think that's an interesting sort of viewpoint to bring into the classroom and see what they can learn from that. And I'll tie this to what Taka said in that we're seeing, and especially over these last year and a half now during the pandemic, but this has started several years ago, where the government is seeing a lot of folks retire and move out of the public sector, and with that, there's a lot of opportunity for not just bringing in new talent from universities, of course, and other areas, having folks rise within the organizations in federal as well. But I think bringing in change and culture management and organizational change management to help facilitate that, to make sure that as organizations evolve and change, as CXOs decide to implement new technologies, data analytics, RPA, AI, whatever, they are supported by industry and the talent that they're bringing in on both the public and private side to make that and facilitate that change. And I think organizational change management is something we are seeing a lot of great opportunity and need for in the federal government right now.
That's great. I mean, it's such a hard topic. I could talk to you guys for an hour about just about just the culture. I'm sure we all have war stories there. Um, you know, so either Taka or Vishal. Uh, so look, these are really hard and challenging topics. This is not easy. I joked before we went live. If this was easy, they wouldn't need any of us, right? Uh, but do you see this? So, well, let me ask this a different way. So let me start with Taka. So you work with all sorts of size companies. Do you see a small company dealing with this better versus a large company, or vice versa? Does it matter? Is it truly a resource issue, or can even a small company, be able to deliver something amazing?
You talking about from the vendor support to the government
Yeah,
perspective?
well, no, I mean, you work with all sorts of different federal agencies and federal contractors, right? Not just both internal and external to you. Do smaller areas handle it better?
I This is sort of my personal view. I don't think so. Small team certainly may be able to navigate um, more quickly, but at the end of the day, bureaucracy is bureaucracy. For example, cybersecurity policy applies whether you're big or small, right? NIST 853 doesn't have a carve out for if you have less than 10 people, you don't have to
That's
do
right.
X, Y, Z. Um,
It's
so,
it's really a great point. If you want to do business with the government in a certain way, you're going to follow these regulatory requirements.
Yeah. Some of this, I would say, my view on a lot of AI implementation has also started very organically. Somebody had an idea, we have a problem that must be solved. What data do we have access to that's already there? Who is sitting around that has data science capability that can help out? And you sort of organically cobble together those capability and you build it from there. I think an example of something like Jake and some other sort of large, gravity casting organization is probably more rare than it is, let's say, more of an organic approach to AI development. Now, there's a pros and cons to that, right? The cons is that as you organically grow, you may not necessarily think about governance as the first topic to mind. You may think about confidence, you think about accuracy, you think about recall. But you may not necessarily think about scalability. You may not necessarily think about the continuous monitoring piece of AI. Whereas a larger organization probably have more robust internal control teams that you can consult with, and maybe has an ethics officer that you can consult with, or certainly lots of lawyers in the federal government that you can consult with. Speed may vary, but I think in general, I'm not seeing whether the size of the organizations matter. But I'll maybe add one anecdote. As part of my responsibilities, I do routinely hear from vendors, equally promising, buy this AI enabled things and all your problem goes away, right? So I do have to sort of cast with a air of skepticism in terms of whether they truly understand the mission of GAO, or whether this is strictly trying to make a quick buck, by hoping that I would take a call. So I think that responsibility also rests with the industry players as well to really understand how the federal government operates. We do not take shortcuts too far. We do not take shortcuts to NIST guidance. There is no magic wand that Taka can wave to say, oh, you know what, let's bypass certain controls. We live and breathe hoping that we're not the subject of the next solar wind, right?
Trust me, we all live that as well.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is, I think, for a lot of a private and public partnership to really effectively work well, I think there are some work that the private sector needs to do in terms of understanding how government does its work. A lot of time we may come across slow, but because our threshold of responsibility is so much higher. Can you imagine if our computer vision targeting system is off by even a 0.1% accuracy? There's a life or death, consequences to that kind of conversation. And certainly government doesn't want to be in a position of promulgating disparate impacts to underrepresented minority when it comes to AI solutions.
And look, your example is exactly why all those rules and regulations are in place.
Yeah. So they exist for a reason. Do they make things a lot slower than maybe desirable? Of course they do. But it's by design, making us to be deliberative in terms of how we roll out these things. Otherwise, once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't really put it back. So I think there's, to Vichel's point, there's a lot of synergy and opportunity for cross collaboration. But there's a lot of responsibility that the agency themselves needs to think about, but also the industry players needs to sort of come to the table, understanding the context in which we operate within.
Great. Vishal, Narup, anything on that?
My main thoughts on this are, I think as an organization, we try to bring the best of breed, regardless of what our capabilities are in-house, or if we have to bring a partner to the table to help bring that best of breed. We will do that for our customers, because at the end of the day, to Taka's point, no one wants to be on the headline news or the front page of the Washington Post for something they didn't account for or think about or implement when it comes to supporting federal clients, because there are such rigor and policy and rules around security and data and privacy, that you have to be prepared for all of that, and you have to be knowledgeable of that space. I don't necessarily think a large or small organization is necessarily better prepared for it. I think organizations that bring the best of breed, the talent, the right expertise from wherever that can be, that they are better prepared to then ultimately develop and implement a good solution for our customers.
That's great. Thank you.
So from a small and a large organization, I look at it slightly differently from a business point of view. Like, for example, if I compare Amazon with many of our local small and medium enterprises, the advantage that a big company like Amazon has is that it has a great variety of products, a great volume of customers, and great number of transactions of all types happening. So Amazon could use AI ML very well. However, if you look at the small companies, they have very little volume of data. They have very little variety of data that they can't make significant predictions. So, I mean, one of the things that we have been talking about casually is that maybe there needs to be a co-op or a consortium of small companies that get together and anonymously share their data so that they can use the information products that are developed from it from a prediction point of view to cross-sell products and so on. So I'll stop there.
That's great. Thank you. You know what? We're at about an hour. I think I have actually another 7 or 8 questions that I can go for another hour, but I think we're going to have to leave it there. Taka, any final closing thoughts? I figured I was going to go into Scaled Agile with you, but I guess we're going to leave that for another session.
Yeah, just invite folks to take a look at our portal, gaoinnovations.gov. We intend, when we talk about knowledge sharing, this is eventually we will start pushing out innovation lab projects, and maybe, someday we're able to sort of establish like a public repo where we post our white papers and artifacts in the spirit of sharing best practices across government, public sector implementations. So more to come. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Vishal?
And this has been exciting, and I've really enjoyed the conversation and to share the stage with Taka and all of you. Thank you for the opportunity to participate, and if anyone has any questions that we didn't get to or wants to even talk more offline, you can connect with me on LinkedIn or send me a quick email. But thank you, Tom and NVTC, for the opportunity.
And Narep.
Likewise, thank you, everyone. Also, I wanted to say that if you are interested in having any of our students through experiential projects at your company, at your location, please contact me. Happy to get that going, whether it's grad students or undergrad students, and not just business school, but also the School of Engineering and College of Science.
And for me, thank you so much for letting me be the moderator today. I really appreciate it. As well, I can be reached on LinkedIn or through Parsons anytime. And I look forward to talking to you guys again. And Tom, thanks for letting us do this.
Well, thank you all. Appreciate it, all four of you, for a really great, wide-ranging conversation. Thanks for being part of it. Taka, thanks for a great talk. It was really interesting. You guys got into a lot of interesting issues in the discussion, so thanks for participating. The next event in this series will be on June the 16th. It's going to feature the founder and CEO of Gravy Analytics. His name is Jeff White. They're a data aggregator, and they provide some other services to a variety of industries, such as entertainment, for example. I think you're going to find that's going to be a very interesting talk. Registration is open for that event. Hope to see you there. You can, everyone's free to hang around and network in the social lounge. We're going to be open, I think, until 3 o'clock. So have a great day.